Cabernet tends to be the sort of Errol Flynn of the grape varieties.
To meet a legend of Australian wine.
Shiraz, more powerful, more structured, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Great single malt whiskey is made in the brewery.
Conventional winemakers who just condemn all natural wine as faulty.
Exploded onto the Australian brewing scene.
Natural winemakers, what we strive to do is match the variety to the area.
Start focusing on the main ingredient in beer, which is water.
This is the Drinks Adventures podcast. I'm James Atkinson, and this is the show where I speak to some of the world's most exciting producers of beer, wine and spirits and uncover trends and issues in the drinks industry today. Welcome back to the Drinks Adventures podcast. This time on the show, we visit the Coonawarra wine region in South Australia for a look at one of Australia's most unique wine styles. The Great Australian Red is a wine competition created by British wine writer Matthew Jukes and Australia's Tyson Stelzer to recognise and celebrate the blend that defines Australia, Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. While in Australia recently for the 2019 competition, Matthew visited Coonawarra for the annual Cabernet Celebrations Festival, where he presented a Great Australian Red masterclass at Wynns Coonawarra Estate. And of course, don't forget to check out my interview with Wynns senior winemaker Sue Hodder in Season 3 of this podcast. I was at Wynns for Matthew's masterclass, and thanks to Coonawarra Vignerons and the digital agency Made With Moxie, I've been able to edit together a highlights package from the masterclass to share with Drinks Adventures listeners. But first, a word from our sponsor. Now, I'm no brewer or distiller, but I have a fair few friends in the industry who are, and I know where they go to source the ingredients they need to make the wonderful beers and spirits that we all enjoy drinking. I'm talking, of course, about Bintani. With experts in all categories on the team, Bintani understands how brewing and distilling ingredients work together like no other supplier. Bintani handpicks the best. Renowned as a champion of Australian wine, Matthew Jukes has visited Australia many times over his 30-plus years in the industry.
It had just been annoying me, irritating the back of my brain for 10 years, because every time I'd been over here on safari and had done a hard day's eating and drinking, I'd be invited back to some winemaker's house or whatever for supper. They'd cook something extraordinary and pull out an old bottle, often clean skin, often kind of bit knackered, pray the cork's all right, don't know what it is. Half the time they didn't know what it was. And they'd say, oh, well, it's a style we used to make, it's the old Cabernet Shiraz, it's 12.8 alcohol and it's, 60 years old and it still looks fresh. And I'd think, blimey, if you could do that in Bordeaux with a simple, straightforward, barely oaked, lowish alcohol red wine that was thrown together, with a few little special parcels that were left over from making other wines, wouldn't the world be a beautiful place?
Matthew recalled that on one of his earlier visits, he was fortunate to meet a legend of Australian wine, the late Len Evans.
And so I took the opportunity to ask him about this wine style that I'd come across, but that I couldn't really find out on the shelves very much. And this wine style, of course, is the one we're going to celebrate today, which is this Cabernet Shiraz, unusual, nay, illegal in France sort of blend. So I said to Len at this dinner, Len, I keep seeing these wines. Why aren't they made today? And he said, it's just not fashionable. Everyone's favouring the straight cabs, the straight Shirazes, focusing on the single varietals, aiming for sort of big point scores from the international journos, etc. And rather shunning this historic classic, as you say, Brett, claret blend. Now, in the absence of great Merlot, and this is a country that doesn't really do great Merlot, and I say that hand on heart, because I remember when the dearly departed and much loved and much missed Wayne Stebbins asked me to host the first Merlot symposium in Melbourne many years ago. Scratching your heads, did anyone turn up to that? It was a day-long celebration, which is a day too long, of Merlot, the joy of Merlot. And we got to the end. It was a very, very big audience. It must have been 200 people in the room. It was at a flashy hotel. It was something like the Park Hyatt or somewhere. It was no expense spared. And we got to the end, and Wayne asked me to sum up the day's proceedings. And I said, do you know what? We probably won't be seeing you again. This will be the one and only Merlot Symposium, and I was right. And so, in the absence of Merlot, Shiraz has done the job, and done the job admirably well. And of course, there are a few companies who have never, ever dropped this flame, charging forwards with it. And they're the famous company whose wines are represented on the table, among others. And that's just the sort of courage and the knowing, the real core knowing, and the inability to drop this style, having made it so well. And those people are clearly Penfolds and Yalumba and Wolf Blass and a few others. And they make wines that are unique, wines that are sensational, wines that literally refuse to fall over in the cellar. But of course, over the last, it's now 14 years, Australia itself is throwing its own spotlight onto it. Winemakers are now putting these wines up front. Collectors are going, oh, I've always been a fan. Of course you have. Yeah. And prices are fluctuating, and you see them popping onto wine lists. And instead of looking into catalogues at big wine shows and going, miscellaneous other blends, page 48B, it's now the Great Australian Red. And the reason why it's the Great Australian Red, the reason why I came up with that name is because it's pretty obvious. It is the Great Australian Red. It's unique in the world. No one does this. A chap in Provence tries it. It's pretty shit. A chap tries it down in Argentina. Another dude in Chile, give up. This is where it lives, and there's a great reason why it works here. And also, the final point before we start tasting is it works from the aforementioned $7.99 level up to the $350 level at every single level. And there's no other wine style in the world, try and think of one, that works from everyday glugger, pub wine, up to mental crazy collector's wine. It's really extraordinary in that regard. And the cheapie will age just as well as the big boy if you give it a chance. So that's why we're here. It's a hell of a story. Just that stuff's a hell of a story. So now I hope that everybody that learns this and takes this on board uses this class of wine as their sort of ticket to gain entry to other markets around the world. And then, of course, every other great wine that Australia makes can follow. Because, of course, there are millions of different styles, a huge diversity, epic wines made from other great varieties that can just barge in after this style is bashed down the door. And this style will bash down the door because this style competes head-to-head with Claret, Bordeaux Claret, Napa Cab, the big South African reds, which are generally Cab, Super Tuscans, which are Cab, yeah? Big Rhones, which are Shiraz. All the world's great red styles, these wines compete and stand side by side on the table.
Together with Lindmans winemaker Brett Sharp and with many leading Coonawarra winemakers in the room, Matthew presented wines at the masterclass ranging in price from $32 a bottle right up to almost $1,500 for the Penfolds Bin 620 Coonawarra Cabernet Shiraz.
This shape and style and structure of wine is reminiscent of Chateau Latour. What else is there in France that is this dense and dark and impenetrable and age-worthy? And it's almost got those sooty, grainy tannins that are so active on the tongue. They almost fizzle on the tongue with so much energy. And it just tells you it's a baby. So the direct comparison to that one, and I'm sure we've got direct comparisons to all of them if we think hard enough, that would be the Latour of the room. And if that's what I'm comparing it to, then that justifies the fact that it's a bloody expensive wine.
Another of the standout wines presented on the day was Yalumba's The Kaylee, winner of the Great Australian Red in both 2014 and 2015, priced at $350.
So if Penfolds Bin 620 was the Chateau Latour, so the impenetrable black, warrior-like, this is Lafitte. This is Lafitte shaped, like a pencil. Completely upright, slender, very, very long. All of its energy's gone into propelling length. So the mass of the wine is not a bowling ball that's been thrown at your palate at high speed to knock your teeth out. It's been extruded into this extraordinarily long flavour. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful wine.
But Matthew emphasised again that the Great Australian Red over-delivers even at the lower price points.
I have a spiral cellar, a really old one that has a glass lid so you can kind of see down into the cellar. It's not very big, but you can see the bottle tops. And I spotted the trademark red Penfolds bottle top right at the bottom of the cellar. It's a pain to get down there because it's quite full and I have to reach and my back's a bit bad and elbow's a bit weird. And so I finally tweaked this bottle out. And I was hoping it was going to be a nice old bottle of something special. And it was Coonawarra Hill Shiraz Cab, 1998. So it was a 20-year-old bottle. It was sensational. It was going to go straight in the cooking pot. Promise you, I'm being honest, it was absolutely stunning. So that's a £7.99 bottle of wine.
Matthew says there are wines entered from all states in the Great Australian Red competition, showcasing a breadth of different styles.
We have wines entered from all states. We have WA, we've got NSW. We've even had some really strange ones from up north. And we have cool climate, really peppery styles. So we've had some styles from the hills. There's no rules. In fact, the rules are that there are no rules, but it is easier to see when you're tasting blind. You can try and predict where the wines are from. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And when we get to the end, I think perhaps we can have a little bit of an open mic about what we think the most successful styles are, perhaps where this style should be going. I know what my thoughts are, and I know from some discussions in the last few days that everybody has quite a firm idea about what their palate prefers, whether it's Cabernet dominant or Shiraz dominant, or whether they like the sort of slightly warmer styles, or perhaps the more mineral, peppery kind of savoury styles. But certainly there is a vogue now for drawing Cabernet from this region and matching it with warmer, rounder Shiraz from Barossa. That's looking like a recipe that a number of people will be using, but it depends on your resource. So no one should be constrained. I mean, you don't have any rules here like that. So no one should be constrained by a recipe. They should just be trying to make the best one they can.
One of the more unique wines presented on the day was the Wynns Vinay Lane Cabernet Shiraz, which was made by co-fermenting the fruit sourced from Wynns vineyards situated along the Coonawarra landmark of Vinay Lane.
These grapes have been in love with each other in the vineyard. They've been chatting, they got on, and at the moment when they were both supposed to go off to college in separate directions, they put them on the same bus. And that's what it tastes like. It is absolute joy in a glass. There is nothing other than love and passion and harmony. And the fact that it's 13.8, we can all take a leaf out of that book because it brings with it innate, freshness, which is incredibly hard to put into a wine later down the line, nay, impossible. And it also is very Coonawarra. It's so harmonious, it's so gentle, it's so friendly. It doesn't square up to you and ask you to sort of put your dukes up, or, where's your broadsword? Or it just says, look, give us a hug, and then we'll sit down and have a nice chat. It's so integrated and smooth and delightful.
Also highlighted was Lindmans Limestone Ridge Vineyard Shiraz Cabernet, a blend of 75% Shiraz and 25% Cabernet. Another example of the seamless integration of these varieties.
Cabernet tends to be the sort of upright, gentlemanly, sort of Errol Flynn of the grape varieties. Shiraz tends to be more powerful, more structured, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And yet this time, what we've done is we flipped it around. So Arnie, it's not an Arnie wine though, because of the limestone, because of your particular plot of land. It's almost like quite a fat bloke on a bicycle. So he's a bit fat, he wakes up in the morning, but when he puts the Lycra on, it all changes. And so Shiraz is this juicy vehicle, which is then given rather a narrow pedestal to stand on, and that being the cab. And I love the way, because I remember the old American oak dominant wines, which actually had a touch too much for my palate of that Hawaiian tropic kind of thing about it, touch too much suntan lotion. And what this does is this has a freshness about it. And you've matched the freshness that you get directly from your soil to the clean nature of this French oak, which has sort of narrowed, tightened things up even further. So by the time this wine gets home after doing 3.5 Ks around the block, it's going to look positively wonderful, to carry on that tired analogy. What's interesting about this is that Shiraz dominant Great Australian Red blends are more plummy and fruity, inevitably. But when you add the Cabernet into it, it has to do the right job. It's not there just to make up the blend so that you can tick the box and go, yeah, I made one. Yeah, that's the Great Australian Red blend. Cabernet has to match, like a puzzle piece, in with the Shiraz. If it doesn't fit, it sticks out like the proverbials. And I call it truck and trailer. You got the big truck, and then you got the little trailer on the end, little Cabernet waggling around on the highway, yeah? Absolutely bloody useless. It's got to be integrated into the machine. And you've done a sterling job at that, because I can't even see the join.
According to Matthew, one of the most pleasing developments in Australian winemaking has been the drive towards aromatic lift and vivacity, which was very much evident in the Great Australian Red wines we saw that day, versus wines showing what people in the industry unflatteringly term a dead fruit character.
The dead fruit thing was, wow, that's rich, therefore it must be good. And I knew what it meant, and I didn't like it anyway, and I associated dead fruit with dead fruit, and I didn't want to see it anymore. And I think that the words got around now, and I think that lift is very important. Aromatic lift and vivacity is important, regardless of the size and the timbre of the wines. And the fact that it's probably now commonplace with great winemaking, and no surprise that at the end of one of our competitions, those sort of wines stand up. One of the most attractive things about the Australian wine scene, Australian wine people, Australian wine drinkers, Australian wine everything, is the fact that you're able to take on board criticism, not in a negative way, but in a challenge way. And not least because you travel and taste so much yourself, so you're actually self-critiquing all the time. You know, just without you knowing it, you're just improving breed all the time. That does not happen anywhere else in the world. So the momentum for improvement here is more positive and more active than anywhere else in the world. And that's why your wines are so good compared to, let's say, late 70s, early 80s. The changes are seismic. I mean, I'm so pleased to be alive now to see it happen, because it will never happen at this rate ever again in the history of mankind. The change from pretty ordinary to absolutely stellar.
The Drinks Adventures podcast is produced by me, James Atkinson, with additional production and mixing by Dave Robertson. You can find complete transcripts, links and other information on the show at drinksadventures.com.au. You can follow me on all social media platforms at @ByJamesAtkinson, like my Facebook page, James Atkinson Drinks Adventures, to be kept informed of podcast giveaways and other news about the show. The Drinks Adventures podcast needs your support as listeners. Please do us a favour and leave an honest review and rating for the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing your feedback, and it helps inform other people this is a show worth listening to. Or simply drop us a line at hello@drinksadventures.com.au.